My name is Sheldon McLeod, and this is Thinking Out Loud, presented to you here on the SaltWire Network. And I don't think any of us would have a hard time imagining what it would be like to be outside in this extreme cold weather. We've got a serious cold snap moving in, and I keep referring to this analogy that the roof only leaks when it rains. We tend not to engage in this public conversation about the trials and tribulations, the folks who are struggling to survive, who may be unhoused or who may be living in tents. And I know that the Out of the Cold Community Association has been very much working towards helping those people most at risk and in need. In fact, they're holding a donation drive right now that all donations received up till Tuesday, February 7th will go to their street outreach budget for weather emergencies. And if you're not familiar, Out of the Cold Community Association has moved from just temporary to also permanent structures to help people who deserve a place to live. It is a basic human right, as it's been described in the past. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome Michelle Malette. They are the executive director of Out of the Cold Association. And Michelle, thank you again for giving some of your time to us today.
For sure.
How long have you been involved as executive director?
The position has only existed for 2 years, 2.5 years. And so I was the first executive director. Previous to that, I was involved as a frontline volunteer and then also part of the on-call, which was kind of a board or the organizing committee. So first time I volunteered for Out of the Cold was in like 2011. And I guess I've been around like pretty consistently for about the last 6 years.
And how have you seen this situation evolve or change or devolve, I guess would be a way to put it?
Well, before that, I worked for another organization. Well, I shouldn't say before, during that time, before this position, I worked for another organization as a housing support worker. And when I was doing that work, 2-3 years ago, it was typical that we could find a space for people. And really the challenge was finding a space that was suitable for them and kind of a situation where there was a supportive landlord and the neighbors were, open and not stigmatizing to someone for, around poverty and that kind of stuff. By the time I was done doing that work, we were kind of moving into the situation where we have now, but it's just been getting more and more desperate. There's really so little housing, and the housing that's available is incredibly expensive, as we all know. So, we've moved from, there's still conversations about just plain affordability, but the reality is that folks that are doing outreach and our 2 street outreach workers right now, one of the people that they worked with on Monday in that terrible weather was someone moving from their apartment, having been evicted, directly into a tent. So it's a really different and desperate situation. It's a situation where pretty much anybody could lose their housing and really not have an option other than to do that, which is so unthinkable. I can't imagine myself living outside.
I guess the surveys or the statistics, and it's just a number, but 1,000 people at any given point through the last number of months have been unhomed or are homeless, if you want to use that terminology. But we all know that it's larger than that. There are people who are precariously housed or are couch surfing. Yeah. And I wonder how your team is doing, trying to deal with the demand that's increased and the pressures that come along with it.
Yeah, everybody who is working in this field right now is really feeling the stress and the desperation. And, we've had several of our own staff who have had issues with, rent evictions and that kind of thing. So they're supporting other folks as they're going through similar situations themselves. Obviously, you and I and folks that work for us typically have more resources and somewhere that they can go. It's quite stressful. The folks that are outside right now, that specifically the 2 outreach workers, Campbell and Nathan, are working with, it's so hard to not be able to give any bit of hope, honestly. And we're very careful to not overpromise what we can or can't do, or maybe what's coming down the line for them as far as opportunities to get inside. We really are, the outreach is very crisis oriented. It's not housing support at all. It's very much delivering the things that someone needs to have to survive another night outside, really.
When I spoke with the head of the health authority, they said, you know what, the crisis in healthcare, we have to look at the long-term issues, deal with medium-term plans, and have short-term or reactionary measures that work within the whole situation. And it sounds like you're in crisis mode, and that it's very difficult to figure out what the long-term plan is based on where is that fair to say right now for you?
Absolutely. Typically before, one of the things that we always did, and it's a lot of emotional work for staff. One of the things we did was what would be called shelter diversion, and that means working with someone that calls to us or shows up at our door, and most of the shelters will do this, looking to find another option for someone, always trying to figure out, can they go back where they were, rather than bringing the person into the shelter. That's the point of it. But the reality is that we're very much like doing things like offering a coffee, or, having a much less in-depth or shortened conversation, because the person already knows that they can't stay with family. They can't go back to where they were last night. They were probably removed for whatever, thing they did from the shelter. Maybe they've been discharged from hospital or corrections, and they don't have another option. So it is really hard to have those conversations, because we are not able to offer something to people, because the reality is there is not a lot to offer. And we do try to move folks along to, we'll tell them about the shelter that's on off the commons there. We'll tell them about the space that's in Sackville now. We used to call around regularly. It was part of our routine when we were more of a temporary shelter. Every night that we would call all the shelters and find out how many beds there were. And that's just not a thing anymore, because we just know there isn't going to be beds.
We have a weather warning in effect for very cold weather moving in. The municipality is talking about opening warming centers, temporary warming centers. Yep. How do you even gear up for this? How do you even prepare the people that you're serving to deal with sub-zero temperatures?
Yeah, so when we first heard about this, the number that we were getting was minus 25, and now we're getting something a little more precise. So, we're expecting minus 45 with the wind chill, which literally is like skin freezing at any amount of time outside, and it's quite dangerous. So we are working on supporting people as much as we can with where will they go that even they might not typically access. If people are expressing, a discomfort, or there's an issue with being able to get to a space, like say getting to Sackville, we're really going to encourage them to access those places and problem solve about where could you stay. There are some extra beds being opened at the South Park shelter. Other shelters, the Christchurch shelter that's in Dartmouth, they're opening some extra beds. That's a male identified only shelter. I believe they're trying to open some extra beds in, I'm not sure where it will be, but hopefully for some more female identified folks. And where's the other one? The other one is in Sackville. They're putting on some extra beds there. So, and actually St. Matthew's Church. So there are some extra beds, but there will always be reasons that people won't access. Someone's in a couple, someone has a pet, those kinds of things. So I have had some contact from the province, and they are working to figure out some alternate arrangements for someone, folks, if they're not able to access those things. But the reality is, we are trying very hard to encourage people to not risk being outside. And I think also the folks that are outside now, we haven't actually experienced that. It's not typical for us to have temperatures that low. So as much as it's very dangerous and uncomfortable to be outside the rest of the winter, this is very different. This is like someone will die if they're outside.
You alluded to having been speaking with the province. We have been hearing this dialogue about, well, jurisdiction, whose responsibility is it, and who should be responsible. We hear about how they can't just offer a place without the necessary supports around it.
Yeah.
But this is a crisis. This is an emergency situation. Do you feel there's enough? Is there a person? Is there a group? Is there one per individual who should be responsible outside of the volunteers and the agencies like yours and out in the cold to do this?
I mean, at the root of talking about humanity and people, we are all responsible for each other. So there's that, and we talk about that, about, we take care of each other. It is the provincial government that's responsible for ensuring that citizens have a place to stay. There are lots of people who have spaces, who have, buildings that are sitting that for whatever reason are not being used, that people could be inside. And the reality is that the spaces that are being offered and that are being opened at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, they're going to close, and it's still wintertime and people will still be outside. So, there's an acknowledgement of the extreme weather that's coming and the extreme danger from that, but we're still looking at people without a home. So yes, of course, I don't think that it is this arguing over jurisdiction. We're talking about people. We're not talking about cars or, infrastructure. We're talking about people. So there should be no argument over jurisdiction or patting on the back because somebody did this or that. It's people, and we need to get people inside.
Yeah, one of the street navigators went on social media to say, media shines a light on people who are in a vulnerable situation, and then that person, politicians and others say, we need to do something for that one person. Yeah. And it ignores the fact that there are dozens of other people just like that. And I'm wondering how that resonated or sat with you when you saw that or heard about it.
I didn't see that, but I mean, that is a thing that happens, and it also happens for everyday people in the community. We're getting a really good response right now with donations and people offering things, and it's almost a similar feeling to what we experience around the holidays, the winter holidays at Christmas time, as people are feeling like they're experiencing something and they want to share it. And right now, people are thinking about the danger of folks being outside and being motivated to do something. But the reality is, like I said, is on Sunday when the cold is gone, this extreme cold, it is still going to be cold. It's still going to be wet. There's still going to be snow on the ground, and there's still going to be, this weather. So I do believe that we want to hear from and we should prioritize and uplift the voices of folks who are experiencing these things themselves, and not just service providers like me. But at the same time, we're always a bit wary in supporting who gets put forward as a spokesperson and what that actually means to them, and who then is going to show up at what is essentially their home, regardless of whether or not it's a tent or whatever the space is. And not everyone who does an interview is kind or I was asked one time to after the homeless memorial to tell a story about someone who had died that year that was funny. And I was asked twice in the interview, and then I said this interview is up for to the interview because no one should be asked that. So there's always going to be people who are going to ask something like that or impose something like that on someone outside. They're already trying to think about how they're going to keep warm and where they're going to lay their head. So we should be hearing these voices, but also not in a predatory way that's consuming them, right? Yeah.
And that's I'm glad that you shared that, and thank you for it. I really very much value the work that, as you say, the humanity. We're helping people, and I want to help the helpers. And I know that there's a campaign underway right now to take donations. I'm wondering if for a call to action, what we can do to perhaps inspire or ask folks to do what they can to give of themselves, or give what they can to give someone else perhaps a little less of a rough go of it in the next few days, weeks, or months.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, money is always helpful to us because when we get money, we're pretty much solely funded by the province. So we have a specific budget. We rely really heavily outside of that on, grants that typically are written for projects, and they have really, there's constraints around how the money can be used. The money that we get from the public, usually like a campaign like this, we've earmarked it for this many days and it will go strictly to the outreach budget. And that is what we'll use it for. It won't go to overhead. It'll buy tents, it'll buy blankets, it'll buy someone a coat, it'll buy, whatever we can't source for free. And it is something that's desperately needed, because when we do get that kind of influx of cash and support, we're going to actually use it for what people are identifying themselves that they need. We don't decide for them. So I think also, though, there's been people who've been reaching out and saying, I can't afford to do that. I'd like to volunteer. I have blankets, whatever. We also will accept those things. It's just hard when we are looking at, scaling up and supporting folks who are outside right now to be able to do that this weekend when it's feeling urgent. So it's good to be thinking about us all the time. If you have a winter coat that you're not using, it's sitting in the closet. If you have boots, if you do have blankets, those kinds of things, even the folks that are staying in our spaces this weekend, they're also going to be cold. They're staying in those little trailers. The heat will be jacked, and we'll try to keep the doors shut and keep it warm as much as we can. But if we were to lose power, for instance, I'm so hopeful that there won't be a loss of power this weekend. That could be pretty disastrous, honestly. We would probably have to move to an emergency space, and I'm not sure if there's plans for that. From the province, I haven't actually heard that. It's the infrastructure for power definitely is not the most stable here. I think really also just having conversations with people in your life at work and in your community and your neighbors to talk about what we do when we see someone who is unhoused, that we respect their space and realize that they absolutely are humans. If you're going to give money, you should be giving it freely, whether you give it to an organization like ours or ADSM or, Shelter Nova Scotia or Phoenix or wherever, that you are giving it freely. If you're giving money to someone that you see outside, that you're giving it freely and you're not putting conditions on it. I'm really hopeful this weekend that, there's going to be a little bit of loosening and a little more understanding of someone has to come inside, that people are not being chased outside from spaces that are warm. I'm very hopeful of that. Typically police respond to calls. So if no one is calling and saying that someone needs to be removed from a bank, then it's much less likely that someone's being removed from a bank vestibule. If you decide to make that call because you don't want to look at somebody who is in a bank vestibule, they're going to be removed. So lots of things for people to think about, and access to indoor spaces is a really, really important one this weekend.
You've given me a lot to think about, Michelle. I hope the people who view this, listen to this, or read it also are given some positive thought. Before we conclude, is there anything else that you feel people should know from your perspective?
We're extremely grateful for the money that's been coming in. That's really, really helpful to us. And I have to say that it's really heartening when we see $5, $10. We've gotten some donations as big as $1,000, and we have a really clear understanding of, that small amounts really matter for us, and they actually really build up. And a lot of the folks that support us, they actually are sending us small amounts. If you're able to send more, obviously, yes, please do. But I think that what's important to know about what we're doing is this specific small space of time that we're doing this fundraising is so that when another event like this happens, we're not kind of scrambling. This isn't going to go into our own regular budget that we would use for this kind of stuff. It'll be set aside so that when there's another, bad snowstorm or bad rainstorm or some other weather event, that's how it's going to be used. Please just really think about not calling police, not calling the security in your building, not hassling somebody ever, but also especially over the next few days when people are trying to establish themselves somewhere inside. This is actually deadly weather. This is real, like skin freeze, lose hands, lose fingers, die weather. And it's really important that we're all remembering that we're talking about people. These are humans. These are people that we know. just because you don't know their name, like I know someone's name, or outreach folks or frontline staff know someone's name, doesn't make them less of a person that actually needs and deserves a space. They should be having a house. We shouldn't be having this conversation.
I know you're in the midst of the work today. I can tell by your phone that people.
What's going on? Yeah.
I thank you so much for just giving me this time today to help share this message, and I wish you nothing but the best. And Michelle Malette is who we've been speaking with. They are the executive director of the Out of the Cold Association. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for speaking with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for prioritizing this.